Dr. Jennifer Cassidy worked in the Irish Diplomatic Service. She has written a book on international diplomacy and gender, and she lectures in global governance and diplomacy at the University of Oxford. Just 48 hours ago, in her home in Dublin, by Zoom, she addressed the UN General Assembly. She was part of an international caucus of women who are looking at women leading the global pandemic reaction to it and how they can use their leadership skills to help us get through it. So that's the quality, and that's why we're so privileged to have somebody like Dr. Jennifer Cassidy speak to us today. So I'll hand you over now to Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Cliona, for that very, very humbling introduction, and it's my pleasure to be here today and to speak on this such a pertinent and pressing issue. So with the time frame and with what we have in front of us, I thought that I would center the leadership and center my discussion on one spotlight in particular, why we're all here on Zoom and not in person, that of COVID-19 and what we're seeing in terms of leadership and what that and the conclusions we can see being drawn from that and what we can learn from that. So to begin on this, it is perhaps no surprise that the pandemic has unleashed a vicious strain of international competition when we should be focusing on international cooperation when it comes to the notion of leadership. The media, national governments, and international institutions have all been posing the questions consistently and forcefully: who led best during the crisis? Who is leading the best? Whose death rate is lower? Who can loosen lockdown restrictions first? Who didn't have to go into lockdown at all? And whose leader is shrouding themselves in glory and whose is embarrassing themselves on the global stage? Now, amid these crass comparisons, and by crass, I mean, I don't think it's an appropriate time to be, when we're trying to save lives, to be delving too much into this notion, but the conclusions we draw from it are very, very pertinent. But one thing has emerged clearly, is that women leaders are more adept at managing COVID-19 than their male counterparts. Indeed, it's a claim that went and is going viral very quickly. Women leaders are being seen to and have shown the ability, and I see this in diplomacy, I see this in politics, I see this in academics. I'm just simply using COVID here as a spotlight to shine on some notions and central arguments that I make and have been making for quite almost a decade now. But they have shown the ability and are more likely to demonstrate their ability to lead and excel and gain confidence with their electorate during a time of crisis, opposed to some male leaders around the world. The women leaders in many nations have been shown to act humbly. They consult with public health experts and act quickly. And in contrast, we have seen male leaders, not all male leaders, and I will say the phrase, not all men, but male leaders have acted poorly to the crisis itself, and have been deemed in many nations, including the UK where I reside, who they were suspicious of experts and they spoke with passion and conviction on subjects they knew little about. And one quote really stands out to me, and that was President Trump when he visited the Center for Disease Control and Prevention in March. And when he was surrounded by medical experts, he said to them, "I really get it. Maybe I have a natural ability for science." And they just stood in disbelief around him. And he wondered this out loud to them, and then they took none of his conclusions. He took none of their conclusions. But at first, as I said, few seemed to question this new and obvious trend. Was it because women themselves were more had a more female leadership style, or was it a signal about the societies that elected them? However, for the moment, what we have is a pattern, and we do need some longitudinal studies. But let's look at the pattern here. With the spotlight, of course, let's shine it on New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern, who has arguably emerged as a champion of governance thanks to her decisive and early action, her straightforward messaging, and her humane interaction and concern for her citizens. And next to that, we have Germany, led by Angela Merkel, with a far lower debt rate than Britain, France, Italy, or Spain. Finland, whose Prime Minister, Sanna, is only 34 and who governs a coalition of 4 female-led parties, and has had fewer than 10% as many deaths as nearby Sweden and the president of Taiwan. The list goes on here. But while musing on the relative efficiencies of these women leaders in a pandemic, a few shared traits are consistently pulled out. It is thanks to their natural qualities of empathy, compassion, humility that are excelling. However, we must not, and I must make this very, very clear in the short space of time, this is not to state that men are devoid of these qualities together. This is simply what we are seeing, a spotlight being shone on at this moment. And more critically, and I think this is very important, we must resist in this pandemic, we must resist it in all types of leadership, be it sports, be it diplomacy, be it academia. We must resist the powerful inclination to ascribe the relative triumphs of women during a crisis or otherwise to personal traits that we see as feminine. If we are forced to accept that feminine traits are the source of good government, then it is hard to avoid the conclusion that the inverse might also be true. Compassion, empathy, and humility might help out in a pandemic, but where does that leave women, say, in a trade negotiation between Putin and Trump, if we are to believe this? What we are seeing among these female leaders, and here I quote the Prime Minister of Iceland when she states, quote, "Gender isn't necessarily important as long as the right decisions are made. Leaders who follow the advice of scientists and take transparent decisions about what measures they are taking and relaying it to their public is what makes this a success." So some deeper things are going on here. And I think this relates, as I said, to any category of leadership we're looking at. That women, because they have traditionally haven't had power, and this is going well beyond COVID, they have had to develop the skills to develop tremendous relationships and tremendous relationship skills. Because if you don't have institutional power, the best way to protect yourself is by knowing what is going on. And the best way to know by what is going on is to have trusted relationships with your institution and the people around you. So I think that in a crisis or otherwise, what we're seeing is the ability to communicate efficiently and effectively with people, develop relationships with people, connect with high levels of empathy, and that is what we're seeing as a true, wonderful trait of leadership. Also, I think women are very strong and tremendous improvisers by nature, and they tend to be very good at adapting to change. This has come out in my research again and again and again. And I come back to the issue here, not on being not able to depend on institutional support, because most of the time the institutions have been derived and constructed by men themselves, and it does undermine women, whether explicitly or implicitly, in terms of opportunities, but also the fact that we're used to dealing with situations that we may not have anticipated, and this is a formidable life strength. So if you work in a culture where everything is set up for you, as most white Western men do, you don't arguably have to develop those skills, as everything is designed for you. But if, as a woman, you walk into a culture that's not designed to support you, you have to develop greater strategies, a wider range of leaderships to get ahead and to get developed and lead your nation. So these are the development capacities. I could go on, as you can tell, for a very longer period of time, but I will just want to highlight one key aspect that is very, very core to my research. And regarding policy recommendations, we can discuss that afterwards as well. And that is, we always ask the question in gender equality and gender equity, the very wanted question, and one that I ask myself is, how many women are there? How many women are there on leadership boards? How many women are there at an entry level? And while that's a worthy question, of course, to have, and one that I do not want removed or even diluted in the slightest, we need another spotlight. And that spotlight is related to, where are the women? And so to highlight this, one of the studies we did was looking at 7,000 female ambassadors around the world globally. So globally, female ambassadors stand at 16%. Now, this is much higher in the Nordics, much lower in some, for example, in Saudi Arabia, they've just appointed the first female ambassador ever. But if we look at that 16% and even take this as a brilliant figure that we've achieved, if you look at where they're being posted, they are not getting New York, they're not getting Geneva, they're not getting Paris, they're not getting Brussels. They are not getting the top postings that we see as the power postings, the true leadership postings, the ones that have the decision-making capabilities. And when I was speaking, and it was mentioned that I had worked, and I still have a very close working relationship with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade here in Ireland. And when I was consulting with them on gender and diplomacy, I brought up this point and I said, you know, women aren't getting globally these top postings. And they said, oh, but Jennifer, we've had a woman ambassador to New York, Geneva, Paris, Brussels, Washington, to which I quickly replied, but it was the same woman. It was the same woman rotating all these top postings. So it doesn't really count if it's just the diversity is not there. And we all did share a laugh, I have to say. And they said, oh, we forgot you worked for us. And then I said, well, thank you. They were like, well played. I was like, thank you. I was very impressed myself. But it was my ambassador, Anne Anderson, in New York, where that was my first embassy posting, who was actually my inspiration. And we'll talk about mentorship later regarding policy recommendations. But let's come to the phrase on leadership, you can't be what you can't see. And coming from a background where my family is not into academics or politics or diplomacy, having this top leadership figure in one of my first postings, Ambassador Anne Anderson, one of Ireland's top diplomats, was truly a source of inspiration for me. So I know I've made a number of points there and I'm aware of time, so I'm going to conclude now, but all to say is that we need a spotlight on not just the numbers, how many women, but also where are the women. We also need to note that in times of crises or otherwise, while we're seeing women excel, this is a symptom of good governance and healthy societies and good institutional frameworks overall. And while that's not to dilute the greatness and the role that these women have played during the crises, it is to show that they have not emerged in a vacuum. And we should not confuse gender traits with women and men themselves, because we do not want it a more divisive conversation. We want a more inclusive one. So there's so much to be said, but with that, I will pass it back to Cliona, and so thank you very much all for listening.
Jennifer, thanks so much. There's already a lot to think about there. One question that obviously jumps out at me, you're saying, where are the women? Not in numbers, but actually what positions of power are they in? So have you been able to see what's stopping them from getting into those positions of power?
Yes, so there's two aspects. One is the notion that not many people like to highlight, including myself, but I think it needs to be highlighted that a lot of women, we don't put ourselves forward for these positions. I too have put myself back, and I have held myself back from positions, including the position I hold now as the lecturer in global governance and diplomacy. I was the first woman hired ever in the history of the course and in 14 years. But when they first opened the job opportunity, I didn't apply because I just thought they don't hire women. But I can't critique an organization for not hiring women when I simply didn't apply. But then they reopened it again and they invited me to apply. So that's one aspect, and that will tie into, if we have another conversation or bring in the mentorship, it's having people to say, you know what, you're good enough, apply. So that aspect of actually women, you know, seeing an environment and thinking, you know what, that environment, you can't be what you can't see it. I never saw a woman in that role, so I didn't apply. And then also not having diverse boards of decision making, bringing them in. So there are two avenues. So I don't want to put it all on the institution themselves. I do think we're at a stage where individual accountability is certainly something to look at. I think you're muted.
that will really chime with people, because this notion that women don't put themselves forward is common in sport as well, and we will discuss that later on, and that's a really good point to make. Thanks so much, Jennifer. Again, we point out to everybody listening, and we've huge numbers today, which is fantastic, to keep asking your questions as they strike you, and we will bring them up at the very end after we've heard all three speakers. Our second speaker is equally eminent and expert in her field, and that is Deirdre Carbery. Deirdre was a captain in the Irish Army for 15 years. She retired last December, and in that time she was also their gender and child protection advisor to the Irish Army. She's advised numerous government departments, she's advised NATO and the UN on gender diversity and inclusion. She's now a consultant on human security and gender, and she's an advisor to the World Health Innovation Summit. So she again is somebody who has her finger on the button of gender equality and leadership. So it's a real privilege to also have Deirdre here today, and I'm going to hand you over now to her. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cliona, and thank you to the OFI. Delighted to join the discussions here today. As Cliona mentioned, my name is Deirdre. I'm a security strategist and also a military veteran. I served for 15 years in the Irish Defence Forces as an infantry officer, taking command of my first platoon of 32 soldiers at the age of 20, way back in 2006. But I was, and I still am, a gender and human security advisor. And essentially what that means is that it's my job to know people, to understand social dynamics, and to assess the different security threats affecting women, men, girls, and boys. And my focus area really over the past number of years has been the direct correlation or the direct connection between inequality and insecurity. And I know that one of the best indicators or predictors of conflict is actually gender equality, or rather the inequality which exists. And I also know that the larger the gender gap is in a country or a region, the more likely that country is to be involved in an intra or interstate conflict. So a conflict within the country's borders, or a conflict external with another country. And a large part of my role has been in the development of plans. And to do this, my understanding has to be gendered. I must understand the roles that males and females play in a society, the gender roles, gender norms, and male and females' access to power and influence. And we call this the application of a gender perspective. And a gender perspective really is just the ability to detect if and when men, women, girls, and boys are being affected by a situation differently due to their gender. And we talk about gender in terms of masculinities and femininities. And it really is about someone's perceived value in a given context. And I always use the statement to highlight that conflict, war, natural disasters, epidemics that we see at the moment, they don't discriminate, but people and social structures do discriminate. And because of that, there'll be different outcomes for people. And as a planner, I need to know what they are and mitigate against these. And I do this through the conduct of a gender assessment and a human security assessment. And these tools and frameworks really can be applied to a family unit, can be applied to a community, a sports club, really any type of organization, because we're looking at inequality as a key driver of conflict. And through my military deployments, I've witnessed sadly some of the very worst aspects in humanity, in countries ravaged by war, ravaged by sexual violence and poverty. And some of these issues may seem worlds away from Ireland or from some of the issues that we're bringing up today when speaking about gender equality in the sporting arena. But what I certainly have found is, whether I've been serving with the UN in the Democratic Republic of Congo, or involved in policy development with NATO or the UN, or working with organizations here in Ireland, is that there are so many commonalities with respect to the challenges and indeed the barriers facing women, which cross cultural, social, religious, and economic boundaries. And what I've also learned over the last 15 years as a military commander and kind of someone involved in the policy development as well and strategy development, is that policies don't necessarily lead to change. Concerted actions really are what lead to change. And the reason we're all here today is to focus on leaders and the role of leadership. And leadership is really the driving force behind this change, because without leadership, an equality strategy or maybe a nice set of new organizational values which promotes equitable principles, I've seen them just gather dust and sit on shelves or sit in filing cabinets. Leadership is of critical importance, and some leaders viewing this or listening in today, you may be identifiable because maybe you hold a position of an official position or an appointment within the organization that identifies you as one. But leadership really, it can and should occur at all levels within an organizational structure. And those without a leadership title can also be key players and key influencers within an organization. And one of my personal favorite groups to focus in on is tomorrow's leaders, because it's at this stage, this critical stage, before someone has even taken their first steps on an organizational ladder, no matter what that organization is, that it's determined whether or not they are going to be given equity of opportunity to succeed. And if I can use the ladder analogy, the ladder for some will be made of reinforced steel, and there's someone on hand to hold you if you fall or help you if you slip. For others, the ladder will be missing the first 4 or 5 rungs and the handle is smeared with grease. And then for a significant number of people, there'll just be no ladder at all. And they're not being put in a position where they can compete with others. So if I could offer maybe some advice in that space, it would be, first of all, to look at a little bit of self-reflection before then moving to organizational reflection, and asking ourselves as leaders, how will I and how can I contribute to this effort? Or really importantly, how might I hinder this effort? Because I think as leaders as well, and it was covered really well last week with examining our own biases and our own socialization in society. But we as leaders, we must first accept that issues do exist. And that's even if we ourselves have not experienced any discrimination or inequality. We must accept that barriers do exist to full and equitable participation. And this acceptance is okay, it's great. No country has achieved gender equality, and no single country globally is set to achieve gender equality by 2030, as set out in the targets in the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So if countries and societies are struggling to make progress, then it's inevitable that our sporting bodies, our organizations and our teams, who are reflections of the societies from which they are drawn, will also experience the exact same issues. And I saw this very clearly as well in the military context, where we were looking to increase women's participation in the military. So this first step really that we can all take together is acceptance that we can all do better and that these barriers exist. Now what we must determine is how ingrained these barriers or how ingrained these organizational norms and culture are. And this can really be determined by open, transparent communication and engagement with all our organization's members, particularly junior members. Ask women, ask men, and ask people who decline to maybe join, and that pool of potential members, and ask them why they don't see your organization as one that they want to participate in. Effective leadership is really involves being accountable as well for our own actions. And it can be uncomfortable or difficult at times, but it's really important to hold others accountable for theirs. And as I said, last week's session covered biases and stereotyping really, really effectively. And as a follow-on from this, one very simple area that we can focus on as leaders is around language and calling out exclusionary language. We must never, ever underestimate the power of words. and the negative impact of these words, even spoken without bad intent or spoken in jest. We can't underestimate the impact that these can have on the individual at the receiving end, and how they can really shape the culture of an organization. From my own experience, I had a commanding officer who opened every single meeting every morning with the words, "Good morning, gentlemen." And as the only woman in the room, regardless really of the intent or if this was just done out of habit, all that mattered was the net effect on me. And that was that I presumed that he didn't want me in the room, didn't value my input. And as a consequence, I never spoke up in those meetings and mentally checked out of the discussions. That group really didn't get to see the best of me. And this is why I now feel that language is really important, and inclusive language is critical for creating an environment where everyone feels seen and everyone feels valued and respected. We can each really simply check our use of language, and then check how our rule books are written, and check how our policies are written, and challenge exclusionary language openly, because you must remember that this isn't about you. This is about creating the widest possible pool of sporting talent, the widest possible pool of effective leaders and coaches and administrative staff with a broad and varied skill set that will enable Ireland to develop this superior sporting capability. So why would we deny our organizations of that chance? And I reflect back on myself and my own socialization and how I was brought up. My dad was in the military and my mom was a primary school teacher. And while it may have been kind of reinforced in me to, be brave and strong and courageous, and I might have had the attitude of, I'll show them, when being told that women don't belong in the military, or women can't lead men, or one of my favorites that I used to get was, by virtue of my reproductive organs and the fact that women are life givers, they can't be life takers. This only served to motivate me further, but I also know that there's many, many more women out there who were and are capable enough and are robust enough to become great military leaders, but maybe decided that the military clearly isn't an organization that they feel that they'll get an equitable opportunity. So we need to remember as leaders that what motivates one individual might just well have the complete opposite effect on the person standing next to them. And definitely the person standing next to them may just well be the next Katie Taylor. I've been trying to draw some parallels as well between the military and kind of the sporting arena, and we can draw a lot of similarities. And one of those is in relation to the historical context. And like the military, traditionally sport has been dominated by men, both in terms of participation and governance. And we have seen significant progress over the last 20 years. But I heard last week's discussion the mention of the word historical on numerous occasions. And it's such a great point, because we can't change history, but we must be aware of it when we look at the origins of sport. And the fact that it was, particularly modern sports, it was clearly geared towards upper class white boys and males, and therefore very much linked and inextricably linked to ideas around upper class masculinity. What makes a man? So for us to reimagine a different future is really to challenge this status quo defined by these historical, what I would call constraints. And again, we need to challenge these assumptions and biases, and the idea that we can put males and females into these separate boxes. I used to hear it a lot with women as soft, weak, that they need to be protected, men as protectors and physically strong. We'll find that males and females cross a very, very broad spectrum in terms of masculine and feminine traits. And these simplistic generalizations just aren't very helpful. And what I would say as well, conscious of time as well, is that it really is a whole of society approach, that, you know, sport and sporting organizations can't be looked at in isolation. And this isn't for the OFI to tackle alone. This really is a team effort where individuals matter, individual actions matter, our education system matters, our local clubs, media, all have a really important role to play. And if I could give one tangible example just before finishing up, of something very kind of real and tangible, is gender responsive budgeting and looking at the allocation of funding. As a human security advisor, one of the most effective ways I use to assess the level of equality in an organization or community or country is to look at who controls the money and how wealth is distributed. Those who have the money have the power and influence. So if we trace the budget allocations of different sports, it will really become evident where the money is, you know, and funding is being allocated, therefore where the value is being placed. And we can assess really if the money has been dedicated to male-dominated sports or male-dominated teams within your club or your organization. Complementary to this, an audit of your facilities for women and men should also be conducted in order to assess if your male and female athletes, coaches, and admin staff are getting equitable experiences through their participation as well. And I do imagine at this stage that people will be thinking about revenue generation, broadcasting rights, ticket prices as maybe possible justifications of any differences. But I maybe exercise maybe a word of caution there as well, that if you are putting forward these as explanations for inequalities or disparities which exist, then we do need to re-examine again our own biases and our socialization, because ultimately this justification won't lead to the change that can be achieved, and a change that will ultimately lead to better performance and inspiring a much larger pool of athletes and coaches into the developmental pipeline. Everyone can be a leader, everyone can champion equality, but you need to want it as well. And definitely action is required. Gender equality should be seen by all of us as very much a cross-cutting theme that can be mainstreamed throughout our budgeting processes, our procurement processes, our training programs, our facilities management. And critically, this isn't a woman's fight. This is very much about women and men working together, agreeing a set of actions and championing each other. And this is really about collective action. I certainly recognize the extra sweat that women must put in to reach the same milestones as men. And I'd kind of leave you with maybe a rousing call, but that we must continue to lead, to influence, and definitely to challenge those who stand in the way of progress. So I'll hand back over to you, Cliona. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That's excellent. I think you make a really good point there, Deirdre, about undervaluing women's sport, even in the cost of tickets that we sometimes charge for international events. It's very interesting that there can be a difference between what we charge to go in to see men and what we charge to go into women, and what value system are we creating if we as associations do that, charge less for women. So again, we would stress to you, please keep adding your questions. We want to see as many of them as possible so that we can raise them at the end and go specifically to the sporting area. But Deirdre did a brilliant job there in actually relating her experience in the military with how it links with sport, which is fascinating as well. Our third and final speaker today is Patricia Heberle. She is a woman who doesn't need any introduction really to anybody who's involved in Olympic sport in Ireland. She's competed in hockey in Olympic Games for Australia. She has twice been an assistant coach at Olympic Games, and she is now clearly very important for Ireland because she is the chef de mission for Ireland at the Tokyo Olympics. Normally, if everything else had remained as it was normal, she would be in Japan right now leading Team Ireland. In some ways, we're lucky to have her here today by another means. So she is going to relate her journey in leadership now, and it is particularly in sport. Welcome, Patricia.
Thank you, Cliona. And thank you to the OFI for giving me this opportunity today. I am going to talk a little bit about my personal journey, but hopefully within that I'm going to highlight some of the things that I've experienced, some of the approaches that have helped me build my leadership skills. And what I'd like to do at the end of that is talk a little bit about Team Island and the role of chef de mission and some of the things we're doing to ensure an equality of experience for our athletes in particular, and also some of the staff going to Tokyo. As Cliona said, in theory, I would be in Tokyo, and in fact, the village would have opened yesterday, and we would have had our first group of sports in, with rowing being one of those teams that would have been in on day one. But that's in the past, and now we obviously have to be in the moment and think about the future. Just to give you some context, I'm Australian. My career has very much been shaped by experiences working in Australian sport, and in particular in hockey. And also I've spent a lot of time in high performance. So unashamedly, I'm going to use some Australian experiences. I am going to be focusing on high performance, but I did start in the world of participation as a coach, so I'm fully aware that environment is different, the opportunities are different. And as I said, I'm then going to take you through to how I focus on my current role. So I've had various shaping experiences. So these are the things that really maybe have shaped my philosophy as a leader and have probably put me in a position to continue to present myself well for leadership positions. The first one, ironically, actually came through an opportunity which was about increasing female coaches in high performance in the Australian sports system. There was a partnered approach between the Australian Sports Commission, which is now called Sport Australia, the Institutes and Academies of Sport, of which in all the territories and states of WA, and my sport at the time, which was Women's Hockey Australia. And the idea was that in state appointments, they would try to reach a quota of 50% females to 50% males, which at that time would have been high ambition, because in fact there was only one female coach within the state system. So I was afforded an opportunity that was almost around affirmative action. So government and sport saying we have to do something proactive, and I think there are possibly some similarities to some of the great work that's now occurring through Sport Ireland and through our national federations in developing female leaders. The really important thing about this program was I had to apply for a role which was a 3-year contract. At the time, I didn't actually understand the agenda around female coaches, and I probably believe to this day that I got that job absolutely on my merits as a coach, and it wasn't about me being a female. I probably learned later that maybe I wasn't necessarily the best candidate at that time, but a calculated risk was taken on my potential to become very good in that role and to be a female coach for not just that time, but for the future. But it was critical that there were some support vehicles around me. And I think this particular job, which was at the South Australian Sports Institute, really has laid the groundwork for every other position I've had since. So that support came in the form of a clear definition around what the role was and where the accountabilities were. It came in the form of unconditional support around mentorship and the attention of our director coaching to work one-to-one with me, because I was a young developing coach at that time. I was not the finished product by any means, and I would need that support. And then probably the third thing was that in parallel to my work with my sport, I was a participant in what was called the Female Apprentice Coach Program. And this was run through the South Australian Sports Institute. I think there were 15 female coaches from a whole range of different Olympic sports. And we had a formalised program where we had sessions every month, theoretical sessions, practical sessions, looking at soft skills, looking at how you integrate sports science and medicine. And that was my first opportunity to actually open my mind to a bigger picture outside of just hockey. And that was to the bigger picture of how you could learn from other sports, and also the bigger picture of leadership not just being about what I did on the pitch with the athletes, about program management and a whole array of different things that were going to be very important to me. So I guess the message there is, if we are trying to increase females in leadership, the best approach from my experience is a partnered approach where you have relevant organisations working together and you set up programs where people can't fail, whether it's a young coach or whether it's a mature coach coming into that sort of opportunity, which could be their first professional job, We need to ensure that the supports around them and the leadership provided allows that person to both succeed and thrive. If not, you'll have people coming into roles and women coming into coaching for short periods of time. And in fact, you never increase the numbers and you don't actually solve the problems. Now, equally at the same time, we should be affording these opportunities to our male coaches. So what I'm not saying is you create an inequality of how you treat people and the type of outcomes you want to achieve and what their experience should be. But I think there is a time and place sometimes where you do have to step up and push your females forward into these opportunities. The second example is more an organisational one, and this comes from a time, sometime later. I've actually had 6 different professional roles in my 30 years of employment in sport, and I feel very fortunate for that. I feel particularly fortunate that there wasn't one of those roles where I was asked to leave the job. I've always had control of my career. I've been able to exercise an element of choice, and because I've always been committed to my own career planning, I've tended to try and find positions that challenge me, suit my skill set and experience, or that I would find interesting. But after some time, when I had deliberately moved away from hockey and from coaching, I had an opportunity to come back. And this was in around about 2005. So I'd been professionally coaching up to that point, had an opportunity to step out and work with government for 4 years and learn a lot about policy, learn a lot about how sport is funded, and again, learn about a bigger picture of not just high performance, but talent development, participation, and how you connect those things. But I went into a role which was called the National Network Manager for Hockey Australia. And Hockey Australia didn't have a performance director at that time. And I know a lot of our Irish sports now have performance directors. There was no performance director. Head coaches had total autonomy of their programs. They made all decisions. They sat over the budget and they could appoint anyone they liked. So as a result, we had a male program and a female program where we had male head coaches and we had very few females in any role other than team manager, which was something that was voluntary. As National Network Manager, I had 13 staff placed in institutes and academies of sport all over Australia. So it was the first time I'd taken on a leadership role where I was managing people, I was managing a set of outcomes, I was managing a pretty significant budget, and I had high level of accountability upwards to my chief executive and board. I had a strong connection to the national programs and the national coaches who didn't have the performance director. And I was working back into the world of talent development and participation. I came on the back of a new strategic plan that Australia had set out, Hockey Australia had set out, with one of the keys being that we needed to get on top of coaching, we needed to have a coaching strategy, and we certainly needed to ensure that we had more female coaches, not just coming into the system at any point, be it participation, talent development or high performance, but they had a pathway and that there was a high level of potential for either long-term employment, long-term involvement, and certainly retention. And so one of the projects I was given was a strategic project, and it was one of the biggest pieces of work I did. And it was about developing that coaching strategy. And it was a 6-year minimum coaching strategy that would take us across 2 Olympic Games. And again, that long-term planning piece, I think when we talk about high performance is really, really important. What I had to do was I had to look at what were the most important elements of high performance coaching, establish my pillars, develop strategies for those particular pillars, of which women's coaching and getting more females into hockey would be a high priority. So I identified that we needed to look at identification, we needed to look at recruitment, we needed to develop how coaches provide professional development, offer transition from one level or one environment to the next, and that might be from voluntary coach to an employed coach, or from a junior coach working with young teenagers into a senior environment. We needed a focus on retention, and we needed to recognise our coaches, and that all of those things were joined and implicit to our particular strategy. But this piece of work actually allowed me to look behind some of the numbers, and we often throw up stats around we may only have 15% of all our high performance coaches or national coaches are women, and then of course we may have 85% in men Or if we're looking at high performance directors, we may have, again, 19% maybe females and the 81% maybe men. But by doing this piece of work, I was able to actually look at some of the rationale as to why females were lost from the system, why we weren't identifying them, and what some of the opportunities were to create more bespoke programs that would suit some of the situations that female coaches found themselves in and saw as barriers, as opposed to some of the men. It also allowed us to look at some of the inequity in our system. So we had a lot of male elite athletes who were able to transition very quickly from their playing days to be appointed into key coaching roles, be they contracted coaches or professional. But we didn't have that in the women. People were not creating that bridge, not creating that transition for women to come into coaching. So I think in developing my leadership skills, sometimes taking on high responsibility and being trusted with doing some of those big pieces of work is very good for your own development, but it also allows you to take a more thorough look and to separate some of the fact and fiction of what is actually happening. I don't like to base my decision making on assumptions, and if I'm using statistics to support decision making, I certainly want to know that I've looked behind the numbers, because sometimes the numbers can be misleading. And the example of that within this hockey context was that we had a couple of states where we had over 50% of talent development coaches were female, and we had states where we had none. But if you only looked at the aggregated figures, then the picture actually wasn't true for every state environment and for every system. And we needed to be mindful of those things. The next thing I want to talk about is some of my own learning experiences as a leader, because I'm very much committed to my own learning, and I always have been. I've always had some sense of career plan, and I think this probably was created from my time as an elite athlete, where there was always a heavy focus on setting goals, and I was reasonably ambitious myself as to what I wanted to do when I left hockey, and ideally I wanted to be able to stay in hockey and use coaching as an opportunity to move forward. But when I first went into coaching, it really was the professionalism of a lot of Olympic sports, and so we were moving from voluntary coaches or coaches who had expenses paid and stipends to being able to look at coaching as a career. And it is very different now. I think we have progressed, and even within an Irish context, I think we are progressing all the time. But one of the realities of working in high performance and working at the top end of any industry is that there's only a certain amount of jobs, and it is about survival of the fittest, and it actually, in most cases, is going to be about appointing the best person. And so if you think that there is going to be a sense of equity in some of these appointments, then that is perhaps naive. But my only expectation has ever been that I would be treated the same as any candidate when I was going for the job. And should I be appointed to a leadership role, again, I would be afforded the same opportunities as any male in the organisation. If there was a situation where you might have a male operations manager because you had a dual gender program and a female operations manager, then equity in salary, equity in conditions of contract, those would be some of the basic things that I would expect. But I think you have to be very realistic when you're working at the top end of sport, and you have to understand that there will be times when you judge the best candidate for the job, and that's the time to celebrate and embrace that opportunity. But at the same time, you will often have strong competition and have very good candidates who in fact don't secure those sort of positions. And probably what's really helped me and kept me going and kept me aspiring to various roles is that I have developed a sense of confidence in what I can do, what my strengths are, what my weaknesses are. And I also have developed a great sense of belief that even when I've been faced with disappointment, even when I've been faced with professional adversity and situations when maybe I didn't achieve what I set out to achieve, I've been able to bounce back reasonably quickly. But I think you do have to be a realist, and you have to understand the big picture of employment in high performance sport. I don't think anyone is born to be a leader, and I've had to learn to lead. As I said, I think in my early career days, I thought leadership really was about technical emphasis and how I worked with my athletes, and it is so much bigger than that. And while people management will always be a critical part of leadership, there are many other things you have to do. I always try to do a lot of homework. on any role that I have sought, and then I try to spend a period of time once I'm in that role learning as much as I can and identifying people that can both support me, identifying expertise that will enhance how I go about my role, and certainly finding new mentors and new critical friends. Because again, you will never be the person who has all the answers, and I have never met a leader in my life that was a complete package and had strengths in every single aspect of leadership and was able to cope and manage well with everything that was thrown at them. So I do believe that mentors in particular are very important, but I also as a leader believe that if you are able to identify or recruit and use good people around you, then that makes your role a lot easier. And I think it makes it a more complete operational situation for some of the people that you may well also be working with and the outcomes that you're trying to drive. I think real-time learning is important. So you can come to a role with qualifications, you can come to a role with previous experience, but you do have to understand that there will be situations thrown at you that maybe you're not equipped for, you haven't experienced before. And I think the whole COVID-19 is a perfect example of that. No one was trained for that experience. And certainly myself, I feel I've been challenged, and I know people around me in similar leadership roles also have had to work their way through what's important, how they're going to manage themselves and how they're going to manage other people over what has been quite a challenge in the last 3 or 4 months. The other thing for me, which I think helps me a lot, and this is about me as a person, but also hopefully as an effective leader, is making time to reflect. I think when you are leading in real time and you are in a situation where you're responding and you're making decisions, sometimes you can get those decisions wrong. If you forget what some of your default behaviours may be when the pressure is on, sometimes you may exercise a poor judgment if you actually don't stop and think and reflect before you actually move forward or take a decision. So I have always made time to reflect, and that's a key part of how I operate. And it's something that in a busy world, I constantly say to people, the opportunity to step back, the opportunity to look at the big picture is really, really important. And this is not about being a female, it's not about being a male. To me, it's just one of the attributes that I believe helps you to be a successful leader. The final thing I wanted to mention was, as I said, I've been employed for over 30 years in various high performance roles, and part of that has been planning. Part of that has also been my willingness to reinvent myself. So I think as you acquire different skills, as you acquire different expertise and your CV starts to build up, you can either pigeonhole yourself, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I could have stayed in the sport of hockey, and with confidence, I probably could say, I think I would still be working in hockey and could get a job in hockey right now. But I actually felt that I wanted something more. And because I'd had some early experiences of looking at other sports, working with coaches of other Olympic sports, I always felt that there were some different possibilities for me. But I've had to reinvent myself, which means often you are looking to acquire new qualifications, assume new learning opportunities, and as I said, seek mentorship in those areas of weakness or deficiency. The sporting landscape is constantly changing. You have to evolve. And with some of the issues of the day, whether we're talking about gender equality, whether we're talking about how we respond to a COVID-19, whether we're talking about the situation in sport where our workforces may be decimated because we don't have the funding and we can't do some of the things we've done. If you are someone that offers a great deal of flexibility in your skill set and experience, you may find yourself in a situation where you're retained, not necessarily retained in the role that you started off with, but you will be regarded as someone of importance for that organisation going forward. So again, if you're looking for a long career in sport and a long career in high performance, just be mindful that there are different ways of approaching that. Yes, you could stay in your sport and what is your passion for your whole career, or you start planning to move out of that. I established my own consultancy company because I didn't want to work full-time. I wanted more freedom around the yes and the no. I didn't expect to assume a full-time role as chef de mission with the OFI and to be working in the Irish sports system. But I think I was positioned to accept some of those opportunities again because of some of the experiences and my willingness to step out of my comfort zone, which was hockey. So the final thing I'm going to talk about is being chef de mission. As I said, I set up my company because I thought I could maybe work towards semi-retirement and pick up part-time projects and work with a whole range of different clients. But really, when the opportunity came, and I had already spent 2 years working with the OFI, well, I gave it a great deal of thought. I decided to go with it because I did believe I was someone who could offer that role a lot. And I also wanted the challenge of actually leading a group to Tokyo. So we are very committed to both athletes first, but we are very committed to an experience of equality for our female athletes, our male athletes, our female staff, male staff, and anyone involved around Team Ireland. And we've been very overt about presenting that, and more you should see it in some of the investment and some of the decision making. But I just wanted to share a story with you, and this is how people get it wrong. Leading into Rio with the Australian basketball team, the media were made aware that the men's basketball team would be travelling business class to Rio and the women would be travelling economy. And again, this was a decision that the AOC had accepted in working with Basketball Australia. And that is a pretty horrendous situation, also highly embarrassing when it hit media. But these things still happen. And for Team Ireland and for how the OFI are working, we want to avoid situations where people see points of difference based on gender. The other thing we've worked a lot on is our staff recruitment and our leadership model. We have different subgroups of leadership. We've tried to recruit the best in their field. We have a lovely mix of both genders, and ironically, we're probably about 50-50 if I look at all the people in leadership positions. There was no intent in this. There's been no deliberate appointments around, we've got to have a female here. We will support with a male there. We have about 50-50, and they're all high quality candidates who earned their roles and were appointed through transparency. The final thing I just wanted to mention is, I think the biggest challenge as chef de mission really is, how do you bring this team together? We come from all our own sports. People are used to having control of their sports. PDs are used to having complete autonomy. We have athletes who are used to being able to do all the things they want to do to support them in their performance. And we know that there are things we can control in Tokyo that we have control of and authority of, and there are things where we just fall in line. So building Team Ireland is probably the biggest challenge I have. And I think the other thing about that is that while it is challenging, what I think is great about working in an Irish environment is the diversity. We have diversity of background from the point of view of ethnicity. We have the gender diversity. We have diversity of experience, first-time Olympians, people who maybe have been to 5 different competitions. We have diversity of style. We have diversity of personality. My role is to bring all that together to support our athletes in preparation, support our athletes and staff in competition, and hopefully come home with a really great performance. What I'd like to do is just leave you with what would be my message around how I see leadership. And I think we're just going to bring a slide up onto the screen. This is the big thing for me. This is what I measure myself on. I will never measure myself on the number of medals or measure myself particularly on a set of results. It's about influence. It's about leaving your mark, leaving a footprint in the sand well after you leave. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tricia. I think what you touched on a lot there is that leadership is about building capacity in others. It's about being reflective as leaders and building capacity in others. But we often find that we come across opposition to that within our organizations. And I'm really interested to know from Jennifer, you know, even in the diplomatic service, do you come across objections? Do you come across very subtle, you know, sexism when some minority is trying to break through? And what's your advice on dealing with it? Is it the mentor system that we see in business in the 30% club?
Yes, and not only do you see, I think we have sometimes moved the conversation so far that we only think there is implicit biases now at play. But one example that I will give, that we hosted the first digital diplomacy conference in the world in Tel Aviv. My main area of expertise is digital diplomacy. and the University of Oxford were hosting it with the Israeli Foreign Ministry. But my other area being gender of diplomacy, of course, the Israeli Foreign Ministry sent out an invitation to all participants, ambassadors, academics, and there was a knockdown category that you put your title. There were 7 different options, and this was only 2 years ago, and my name was attached to this. And there's 7 different options, and every single one of them had nothing to do with the female. So it was Mr., there was Sir, there was Doctor, there was Ambassador, there was Policy Advisor, there was Consultant. Not one option was, you could not even say you were a miss. So this was explicit. Now, my name was attached to this, but I thought the ministry would have been dealing with it. And when I messaged them and said, you know, some females can't sign up because they don't have these titles, they said, oh, they can just sign up separately. And this was, you know, only 2 years ago. So we see it's very, in the diplomatic service, very explicit. And I've had, in one of the chapters actually in my, the book that I published on gender and diplomacy, one of the chapters was written by Jane Marius. She was the UK ambassador to Yemen and Iran at different postings. And she gives the example of when she was ambassador to Yemen, and this was only 3 years ago, that they were going into she was the only female ambassador of all the host regions or sending states. They were going into a dinner. And the security services said, no, you will go into the room with the wives. She said, but I am the UK ambassador. I represent Her Majesty the Queen. And they said, it doesn't matter. You will be going into the room with the wives. And the Spanish ambassador and the Brazilian ambassador stood. And this is why allyship is very important. I deem it very important. The Spanish ambassador and the Brazilian ambassador stood behind her, in front of her, and said to security services, wherever she's going, we're going. And the security service said, okay, no, you're allowed to go into that room. So I know some when we talk about gender equality and how to get around these obstacles, and when they exist explicitly, some people think, you know, I don't need the helping hand. I'm always grateful for the helping hand. And when I called out sexism in academia subtly the other day, and there was quite a huge, I got 325 direct messages on Twitter about this. And when men responded and said, yes, I see this in the organization, and recognize that and validated, for me, that's very validating. And I know we shouldn't need this validation, but again, it stops the segregation of it just women seeing the issue, and it's not just saying, oh, that's an isolated incident. So that's one aspect of, yes, it's still very much there implicitly and explicitly. And then the second aspect was the mentorship, I believe.
Yeah.
And the mentorship, yeah, I think it's extremely important. And one thing to note that, and this ties into the not segregating the conversation of just men and women, not just having mentorship of female to female, but male to female as well. Because what that allows for is, if we are wanting, this is what we were talking about at the UN yesterday, is how we are going to reconstruct this new normal, how we are going to reconstruct our institutions after all of this is over. And so if we being the entire populace is going to reconstruct it, we need this continuous dialogue and mentorship between men and women. So while it is great, as I said, for women to say to other women, you know what, you're good enough for the job, put your name forward, it is also good to have male to female leadership as well, because it stops that segregation and that division that we certainly don't want.
Yes, and actually we had a question specifically on that to Deirdre, which is that exact notion. Somebody was very curious, and it struck me as well, was when you were called sir and you were being given that male pronoun, was it a man were men involved in helping you to be stronger, to take these things on, to take an issue on, and did you get male support and allyship and mentorship?
I'd have to say no, but I guess it's with the benefit of hindsight and, you know, age and experience and all that. I do see that particularly in a hierarchical organization, just how important that allyship is. Where I was, you know, a junior leader in the organization, I actually, because of how I was socialized, I didn't want to be seen as different either. I really just wanted to be seen as one of the lads, and regardless of how maybe that was negatively impacting on me. And it's just through, I guess, gaining that experience and just growing up, I guess, a little as well, and gaining my confidence that I really see how maybe silly I was back at the time where I didn't speak up. And the last few years, I certainly would be the first to speak up in those situations. But it's one thing when I am talking to leaders in organizations, just how, particularly male leaders, how critical and how impactful, and Jennifer just spoke about it there, that allyship is, and particularly when there is a hierarchical structure, it can be incredibly effective to show and call out, or to say, no, this isn't right, or, you know, the language you're using is exclusionary, or that's not very helpful. That when that's been done for me, I've felt 10 feet tall, and I feel then I'm comfortable enough then to say, yeah, do you know, actually I would much prefer XYZ. So definitely, I think I think allyship is incredibly important.
It's really interesting to hear you say that in later life, when you were younger, you didn't feel that you were in the place to do that. So Tricia, one of the key questions I think about is this thing about real leaders build capacity in the people around them, particularly in the young people around them. What's your best advice to people listening to build that leadership capacity in the men and women who are in their organizations?
I think the first thing is to look at the bigger picture of the organisation, what they're trying to achieve, where you fit, and to recognise that if one person is in control of everything, if one person is making all of the decisions and you never give people an opportunity, then perhaps embedding change or embedding some sort of new direction or sustainability of driving the outcomes are never going to happen. Creating legacy, allowing succession planning, but just developing people by delegation and giving them responsibility is really important. Most of the time we actually don't necessarily understand the capability of some of the people we work with. And as I said, if you pigeonhole them, you miss great opportunities. And I think this is one of the things that is really exciting about the OFI at the moment. Internally as an organisation, we have a whole range of different staff who could probably all assume leadership as chef de mission of any number of the campaigns that we will run across the next 4 years, be they winter, summer, youth or senior summer games. So I think for me as a leader, looking at that big picture and actually understanding that many hands and many minds actually can make me look better, make my job easier, but in fact enhance the whole experience for people, and in turn allow you to identify the next lot of leaders coming through, or in fact that maybe you don't have some of those qualities and there are gaps, and that then can shape people's professional development or shape some of the performance management to actually either allow them to step up, or sometimes you actually have to say, no, we are going to need to bring talent into the organisation, or we may even need to refresh. So that whole world of recruitment, bringing people in, retaining, developing them, I actually quite enjoy that. But as I said, if I can influence and impact on other people in my staff group, then I think that's one of the key attributes of successful leadership.
Yeah, and they often say that successful leaders are people who are willing to let the reins go, and I think you really reflected that there, in that you have to have succession planning, you have to give other people opportunities, and perhaps for women, given everything we read in studies, it has to be even more targeted, if you like, to women to help them to move into leadership roles. Before we finish, could we ask each of you to summarise and give us, if you like, your strongest message from today, and I will start with Jennifer, please.
Thank you, and I'll be very, very brief and short in a few policy recommendations, but I will just do them simply titled. One is we must, alongside asking the question, how many women, we must ask the question, where are the women? The second is that the burden of representation for gender equality must now shift. That is, alongside women putting in the effort for their fight for justice, equality and equity, men must also join us, as they have been, but putting in just as much challenge and effort. And finally, I would like to address the notion of the 1 in 3. And we can see this 1 in 3, 1 in 5, whatever that might be. And we've seen this in global events and current events happening around the world. And that is, just because we may hit a target, that does not mean that that one woman or those 2 women on the board represent all women and all voices. I certainly, even speaking today, of course, do not represent the voices and journeys of so many women. And I certainly wouldn't want to speak for them. So yes, how many women, where are the women, the burden of representation, and also the 1 in 3. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for having me today.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. We'll go to Deirdre now for your summary. Thanks, Jennifer.
Really that we should see sports as a vehicle to challenge the stereotypes and to dispel the myths around femininity and what makes a woman. Start seeing, you know, women as strong, powerful, courageous, aggressive, brave, and start applying a little bit of critical thinking and understanding the origins of sport. And then looking at ultimately ourselves and where we want to go and what we can do to contribute to that effort. And I'd just say for leadership, leadership shouldn't be comfortable, and it shouldn't be easy, and we should be constantly trying to challenge ourselves and surround ourselves with proactively surround ourselves with points of view and opinions that are different from our own as well. And again, I would just like to say thank you again for a great discussion and for sharing so many great examples as well of how we can progress this.
Brilliant. Thank you, Deirdre. And finally to you, Tricia.
Look, I think what I would say is that I think as a leader, you have a great responsibility. And as a female leader, I want to be a role model for other women who are either in leadership or aspire to some sort of leadership role, whatever environment, whatever level. I want to be an ambassador and I want to be able to promote women in leadership. But as I said, most of all, when people think about me and how I lead, I want them to recognise that it's about supporting, it's about being able to influence, and it's about being able to, as I said, to leave your mark within the organisation where people actually look back and recognise it well after you've left the building.
Thank you so much to all 3 of you for your time and your expertise. Thanks to everybody for attending today. Apologies for going over time, but if you had questions that you put in and we didn't get to them, please contact Heather at olympicsport.ie with anything that hasn't been addressed. The great news is that we are only halfway through this series. There are 2 more to come, and next week's will concentrate on gender equity in the governance of sport. And please encourage anybody else you know who might be interested in this series to join us. We hope that it will be of really great practical use to you. There's never been a time in the world, I think, where we're reflecting on what we're doing, and leadership certainly is about constant reflection and looking at what we're doing. So thanks to everybody for joining, and take care.